Lily sat by the small window of her room in the town of Silver Falls, Maine, pulling a needle through a heavy piece of blue silk. The sun had not come up yet, and the air in the house was still and cold. Her fingers felt stiff, but she did not stop moving. She had to finish the hem on Maya's dress before the clock in the hall struck 6 o'clock. If the dress was not ready, Eleanor would make sure Lily did not get breakfast. It was a simple rule in the house that had been her father's. Lily worked, and the others lived. Her father had once told her that a person's worth was found in what they did when they thought no one was looking. He had been a kind man, a doctor, who took care of everyone in this small town. But he had been gone for 3 years, and the house had grown very quiet and very cold since the day he died. The blue silk was slippery, and the thread was thin. Lily had to squint to see her own stitches in the dim light of a single candle. She did not have a proper lamp, only a small nub of wax that was nearly burnt down to the bottom of the holder. Her back ached from leaning forward for 5 hours, but she kept her spine straight. She had learned that if she let herself slump, the tiredness would win. She knotted the thread and cut it with a pair of small iron scissors. One dress was finished. She still had to press Chloe's gown and polish 4 pairs of leather shoes. She stood up and stretched her arms, hearing her joints pop in the silence. The room was small, tucked away at the back of the house, where the heat from the furnace never quite reached. It was a room for someone who was meant to be forgotten. She walked down the narrow stairs to the kitchen. The floorboards did not creak because she knew exactly where to step to keep the house quiet. She filled the kettle and put it on the stove. While the water heated, she started on the shoes. Maya and Chloe had been out late the night before at a party Lily had not been invited to attend. Their shoes were covered in dried mud and grass stains from the garden. Lily sat on a low wooden stool and began to scrub the leather. She did not mind the work itself, but she minded the silence of the house. It was a house that had once been full of laughter and the smell of her mother's cooking. Now it smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume that did not belong to her. Eleanor came into the kitchen at exactly 7 o'clock. She was dressed in a dark robe, her hair already pinned up perfectly. She did not look at Lily as she walked past. She went straight to the kettle and poured herself a cup of tea. "The blue silk," Eleanor said. Her voice was like a dry leaf scraping on stone. "Is it done?" Lily nodded as she wiped a smudge off a silver heel. "It is on the chair in the sewing room. I finished it an hour ago." Eleanor took a slow sip of her tea. "Good. Maya will need to try it on after breakfast. We have a lot to do today." The mail came early this morning. She set a heavy envelope on the wooden table. It was thick and white, with a seal made of dark red wax. Lily looked at the seal. It was a crown made of thorns. Everyone in Silver Falls knew that mark. It belonged to the estate on the hill, the place people called Stonecrest. And it belonged to Silas, the man who had ruled the town for as long as anyone could remember. People said he was a vampire king, a man who did not age and did not smile. They said his hair was as white as the Maine snow, and his skin was as pale as marble. Lily had only seen him once, years ago, when she was a child. He had been sitting in the back of a black car, and she remembered how still he was. He had not looked like a person. He had looked like a statue that happened to be breathing. "An invitation," Eleanor said, and for the first time there was a bit of color in her cheeks. "Silas is holding a selection. He wants to find someone to stay at Stonecrest. A partner. A queen, though he does not use that word." She tapped the envelope with a long fingernail. "He has invited 20 families. We are one of them." Lily went back to the shoes, her heart hitting her ribs a little harder than usual. A selection at Stonecrest was not just a party. It was a chance to change everything. If Maya or Chloe was chosen, the family would never have to worry about money again. They would live in the big house, with the high stone walls and the glass conservatory. "I will need you to pack the trunks," Eleanor said, looking at Lily now with a cold stare. "We leave in 2 days. You will come with us, of course. Someone has to look after the girls' things. You will stay in the servant wing and make sure their gowns are pressed every evening. You are not to speak to anyone unless you are spoken to, and you are certainly not to tell anyone you are related to us. To the guests, you are the help. Do you understand?" Lily felt a small, sharp spark of something in her chest. It was not anger, exactly. It was more like a cold realization. "Yes," she said. I understand. She picked up the next shoe and began to polish it until she could see her own reflection in the black leather. The drive to Stonecrest took 4 hours. The town of Silver Falls dropped away, replaced by thick pine forests and gray rocks. Lily sat in the back of a hired van with the heavy trunks and the garment bags. The heater did not work well in the back, so she wrapped her thin wool coat around her shoulders and watched the trees go by through the window. She thought about her father's books. He had a whole shelf of them about the history of the region. He had told her once that the man on the hill was older than the town itself. He had said that Silas was a man who carried a heavy burden, though he never explained what that meant to a young girl. The van hit a deep pothole, and the trunks shifted. Lily put out a hand to steady them. She did not want the silk to wrinkle after all her hard work. She spent the time counting the miles in her head. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. At noon, the van stopped at a small gas station near the edge of the forest. Eleanor and the girls went inside to get hot coffee and sandwiches. Lily stayed in the back. She was not allowed to go in with them. A few minutes later, the back door of the van opened. It was a young woman with a red apron and a tired face. She held out a paper bag to Lily. The lady said to give this to the girl in the back, the woman said. Lily took the bag. Inside was a plain roll and a small green apple. Thank you, Lily said. The woman looked at her, noticing her red hands and the way she was shivering in the cold air. It is cold back here, the woman said. Do you want my scarf? I have another one in the office. Lily shook her head. No, I am okay. But thank you for the bag. The woman lingered for a second, looking at the Stonecrest crest on the van. You are going up to the hill, aren't you? For the king? Lily nodded. The woman made a small face. They say it is beautiful up there, but it is quiet. Too quiet for some people. She closed the door, and Lily was alone again. She ate the roll slowly, savoring the warmth of the bread. As they got closer to the estate, the road turned from asphalt to gravel. The trees grew taller, their branches interlacing over the road like fingers. Then the gates appeared. They were made of wrought iron, 20 feet high, and they opened without a sound as the van approached. Beyond the gates was a long driveway lined with white statues. They were all of women, their faces frozen in different expressions of peace or sadness. Lily leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She had never seen anything so grand and so lonely at the same time. The house itself was gray stone, with hundreds of windows that looked like dark eyes watching them arrive. The van stopped in the courtyard. Footmen in dark suits appeared to take the trunks. Eleanor, Maya, and Chloe stepped out of the front, smoothing their skirts and putting on their best smiles for the cameras. Lily climbed out of the back, feeling small and dusty in her old clothes. She stood by the garment bags, waiting for someone to tell her where to go. A man with gray hair and a very straight back walked toward them. I am Thomas, he said, the head of the household. Guests will be shown to the east wing. Staff will follow the path to the left. He looked at Lily for a moment. His eyes were kind, but they did not linger. Lily picked up the 2 heaviest bags and followed a young girl named Sarah toward the staff entrance. The hallway was narrow and smelled of beeswax. Sarah pointed to a door. That is your room, she said. It is small, but it has a heater. You need to be in the main kitchen in 30 minutes to get the schedule for the guests. The king does not like people being late for their duties. Lily thanked her and went inside. The room was barely big enough for a bed and a chest of drawers, but it was clean. She sat on the bed for a moment, her hands shaking. She was at Stonecrest. She was in the house of the Vampire King. She took a deep breath and stood up. She had work to do. She opened the garment bags and began to hang up the dresses. Maya's blue silk, Chloe's pale green satin, Eleanor's dark purple velvet. They were beautiful clothes, and they did not belong to her. She touched the lace on Maya's sleeve. She had spent 15 hours on that lace. She hoped it was enough. She hoped that for once, the work of her hands would be seen by someone who cared. But as she walked down to the kitchen, she reminded herself that she was not here to be seen. She was here to be a shadow in the halls. The first dinner was held in a room so large it felt like being inside a cathedral. There were 20 women sitting at a long mahogany table, their jewelry sparkling under the light of 100 candles. Lily stood in the shadows of the doorway, holding a tray of extra napkins. She had been told to stay there in case anyone needed anything. She watched as Silas entered the room. The air seemed to get thinner when he walked in. He was taller than she expected. His hair was exactly as the stories said, pure white, falling just past his ears. His skin was so pale, it almost looked translucent in the bright candlelight. He wore a suit of charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to his frame. He did not look at the women as he sat at the head of the table. He looked at the table itself, at the white flowers and the silver. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was low and resonant like the sound of a cello. "I am not a man who enjoys long speeches. I invited you here because this house is too quiet. I want to see if one of you can bring something more than just noise to it." He looked up then, and his eyes were a very dark, intense gray. They moved over the faces of the women one by one. Maya sat 3 seats down from him. She was leaning forward, her smile bright and practiced. Chloe was next to her, looking slightly nervous. Silas's gaze passed over them without stopping. He did not seem impressed by the expensive dresses or the perfume. He seemed bored with the whole event. The dinner began, and the room was filled with the sound of silver hitting fine china. The women talked about their families, their travels, and their accomplishments. One talked about her painting. Another talked about her horses. Silas listened, but he did not say much. He ate very little, mostly just drinking water from a crystal glass. Halfway through the meal, a young server named Peter tripped on the edge of a rug. He was carrying a tray of wine glasses, and 3 of them shattered on the floor. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth and onto the hem of a girl's yellow dress. The girl let out a small cry of disgust. "Look at what you have done," she snapped. "This dress cost more than you make in a year." Peter turned bright red, his hands trembling as he tried to pick up the glass. "I am so sorry, miss. I will get a cloth." The girl did not stop. "You are clumsy. You should not be working in a house like this." Lily did not think about the rules. She moved out of the shadows, set her tray down on a side table, and knelt on the floor next to Peter. "It is okay," she whispered to him. "I have got the glass. You go get the salt for the stain." She began to pick up the shards with her bare hands, careful not to let them click against each other. She could feel the eyes of the whole room on her. She could feel Eleanor's furious gaze from across the table. But she did not look up. She focused on the glass. Peter looked at her with huge, grateful eyes and hurried away toward the kitchen. "Who are you?" the girl in the yellow dress asked, her voice sharp and loud. Lily did not answer. She finished picking up the glass and stood up. She walked to the girl and used a clean napkin to blot the wine on the yellow silk. "If you put salt on it now, the stain will not set," Lily said quietly. The girl looked at her like she was an insect. "I did not ask for your advice. Go back to the wall where you belong." Lily bowed her head and stepped back into the shadows. She felt the heat in her face, the sting of the girl's words. She looked down at her hands and saw a small bead of blood on her thumb where a piece of glass had nicked her. She tucked her thumb into her palm and looked toward the head of the table. Silas was watching her. He was not looking at the girl in the yellow dress. He was not looking at the broken glass. He was looking directly at Lily. His expression had not changed, but there was a flicker of something in his dark gray eyes. It was not boredom anymore. It was curiosity. He watched her for 5 seconds, and then he looked back at his plate. The dinner continued, but the air in the room felt different. Lily stayed in the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had broken the rule. She had been seen by the king. The next morning, Lily was sent to the library to clean the high shelves. Thomas had told her that the library was Silas's favorite room, and that it had to be perfect every day. Lily did not mind the task. She loved the smell of old paper and leather. She climbed the rolling ladder, a dustcloth in her hand, and began to work. There were thousands of books, some of them so old the titles were fading on the spines. She found herself reading the names as she went: history, philosophy, science. It was the kind of collection her father would have spent 10 years exploring. She reached the top shelf and saw a book that was sitting slightly crooked. She pulled it out to straighten it. It was a ledger, bound in black leather. As she moved it, a loose sheet of paper fell out and drifted to the floor. Lily climbed down the ladder to pick it up. It was a list of figures, written in a neat, cramped hand. At the bottom of the page, there was a total that had been circled 3 times. Lily looked at the numbers. She had always been good at math. Her father had taught her how to keep the books for his clinic when she was only 12 years old. She frowned at the page. The total at the bottom was wrong. It was off by $50. She looked at the column again, her finger tracing the numbers. There was a mistake in the addition on the fourth line. She looked around the library. There was a desk in the corner with a pen and a bottle of ink. She knew she should not touch it. She knew she should just put the paper back in the book and go back to dusting. But the mistake bothered her. It was like a crooked picture on a wall. She went to the desk, picked up the pen, and wrote the correct total in small letters next to the circled one. "You have a quick eye for numbers." The voice came from the doorway, and Lily nearly dropped the pen. Silas was standing there. He was not wearing his suit jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His white hair was a little messy, as if he had been running his hands through it in thought. He walked into the room, his movements silent and graceful. He did not look like a king in that moment. He looked like a man who had not slept well. He came to the desk and looked down at the paper. He did not say anything for a long time. "I am sorry," Lily said, her voice shaking. "I should not have touched it. I just saw the error and I could not leave it." Silas picked up the paper and looked at her correction. "My accountant has been over these books 3 times, he said. He told me they were perfect." He looked at her then, his gray eyes searching her face. "Where did you learn to do that?" Lily swallowed hard. "My father, he was a doctor. He taught me that a small mistake in a ledger can cause a big problem later on. I used to help him every Sunday morning." Silas set the paper down on the desk. He was a wise man. He leaned against the edge of the desk. "What is your name?" Lily hesitated. "Lily." Silas tilted his head. "And you are here with the family from the town? The one with the 2 girls who spend a lot of time talking about their hair?" Lily felt a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth, but she pushed it down. "Yes, I work for them." Silas nodded slowly. "You work for them, but you fix my books. That is an interesting arrangement." He did not dismiss her. He stayed there, looking at the shelves. "Do you like books, Lily?" She looked at the thousands of volumes surrounding them. "I love them. My father said that a book is a way to travel without ever leaving your chair." Silas reached out and touched the spine of a book on the desk. He was right. But sometimes people use books to hide from the world. He looked at her again, and for a second, Lily did not feel like a servant, and he did not feel like a king. They were just 2 people in a quiet room. "You can stay here," Silas said. "When you are finished with your work, you are welcome to read. I would rather the books be used than just sit here gathering dust." Lily blinked, surprised by the offer. "Thank you. That is very kind of you." Silas made a small sound that might have been a laugh, though it was very quiet. "I am not kind, Lily. I am just practical. And I appreciate accuracy." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving her standing by the desk. She looked at the pen in her hand and the paper on the desk. She felt like she had just stepped into a different world. Lily walked back from the library with a strange warmth in her chest, the image of Silas standing by the desk still fresh in her mind. She hurried up the back stairs to the east wing, where Eleanor and the girls were staying, knowing she had been gone too long. The moment she entered the sitting room, Eleanor threw a pile of crumpled dresses onto the floor at her feet. Maya was sitting at the vanity, complaining that the cold air was ruining her skin, while Chloe tried on a pair of gold shoes that were clearly too small for her feet. Eleanor did not ask where Lily had been. She simply pointed at the floor and told her to get to work on the stains from the previous night. She demanded a fresh pitcher of ice water, with exactly 3 slices of lemon, warning Lily that if it was late, she would spend the evening cleaning the servants' staircase instead of resting. Lily knelt to gather the dresses, saying nothing, her mind still turning over the words the Vampire King had spoken to her in the quiet library. Down in the main kitchen, the air was thick, with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread as the cooks prepared for the afternoon tea. Lily walked to the silver counters to prepare the lemon water, finding sitting on a small wooden stool near the pantry, still looking pale from his mistake at dinner. He stood up quickly when he saw her, a look of deep relief crossing his face as he offered to help her lift the heavy ice block from the storage chest. He told her that Thomas had been fair with him, only giving him a warning instead of sending him back to the village. And he knew it was because Lily had stepped in to clear the mess so quickly. Sarah joined them by the sink, whispering that the king had been in a strange mood all morning, asking Thomas detailed questions about the staff schedules and the town families. Lily listened quietly as she sliced the lemons, wondering if Silas was looking for the person who fixed his ledger, or if he was simply trying to understand the people who had entered his quiet home. She carried the silver tray back up to the guest suites, her steps deliberate, and even as she balanced the heavy crystal pitcher. When she entered the room, Maya was arguing with Chloe about who would sit closer to Silas during the upcoming carriage ride through the estate grounds. Eleanor was standing by the window, watching the other guests stroll through the white statues in the courtyard, her face tight with ambition and worry. She turned to Lily as the tray was set down, her voice dropping to a low whisper so her daughters would not hear her sharp words. She told Lily that she looked like a ghost in her old gray clothes, and ordered her to remain in the servant quarters for the rest of the day to avoid embarrassing the family. Eleanor said that important people from the state capital were arriving for the evening event, and she did not want a dusty girl ruining Maya's chances of making a good impression on the king. Lily spent the next 4 hours in her tiny room, mending a torn seam on Chloe's pink gown and watching the snow begin to fall lightly against the glass window. When the clock in the hall struck 4 o'clock, she knew the guests had moved to the grand salon for their tea, leaving the back corridors empty and quiet. Remembering Silas' permission, she walked down the narrow stone hallway to the library, her soft shoes making no sound against the floorboards. The room was empty when she entered, the fire burning low in the hearth and casting long shadows across the dark walnut shelves. She walked to the section her father had loved most, searching for a book about the early history of the logging towns in northern Maine. She found a small volume bound in green cloth, sitting down in one of the large leather chairs near the window to read the words her father had often quoted to her during the long winter nights. She had only read 3 pages when she heard the heavy door click open, and Silas walked into the room with his slow, measured stride. He did not seem surprised to find her there. Instead, he walked straight to the chair across from her and sat down without a word. He looked at the green book in her hands, his gray eyes steady and calm, as he asked if she had found what she was looking for in the old pages. Lily told him that her father used to collect stories about the original families who built the valley, and she wanted to see if the estate had any records from that time. Silas leaned back, his white hair catching the faint light from the window, as he told her that his family had kept every piece of paper since the first stone of the house was laid. He spoke of the hard winters 50 years ago, describing how the townspeople and the estate had worked together to survive the deep snow when the supply trains could not reach the valley. As they talked, the room grew darker, the fire providing most of the light as the sun dipped below the pine trees outside. Silas noticed the small white bandage Lily had wrapped around her thumb, his expression hardening slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver tin. He stood up and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside her chair to take her hand in his cool, steady fingers. He opened the tin, revealing a thick green salve that smelled of pine needles and honey, and applied a small amount to the cut on her skin. He told her that the glass from his tables should not have harmed her, and that he expected everyone under his roof to be treated with care, regardless of their position. Lily held her breath as his fingers moved gently against her hand, feeling the sting leave her skin as the medicine began to work, her heart beating fast at his unexpected closeness. The door opened again, and Thomas walked into the library carrying a leather folder full of estate reports, stopping short when he saw the king sitting near the servant girl. Silas did not move away immediately. He rose slowly, turning to his head of household with his usual calm authority and asking for the evening update. Thomas reported that the guests were enjoying their tea, but there was an urgent matter regarding the town school council that required the king's attention before the final ball. He explained that the local trustees had found a massive deficit in the winter heating fund, and the school might have to close its doors before the first deep freeze arrived in December. Silas took the folder, his white eyebrows drawing together as he muttered that the town endowment should have covered those costs twice over, according to the agreements made 3 years ago. Lily stood up to leave, knowing she should not be present for a private business discussion between the king and his chief advisor. But as she reached the door, she remembered her father's long conversations about the school board and the hidden fees that the local administrators used to complain about during the town meetings. She turned back to Silas, her voice quiet but clear, as she told him that her father had kept an alternate ledger for the school funds in his private study before his illness took him. She explained that Eleanor had packed those papers into storage boxes when they cleared the old house, and she believed the original transfer receipts might still be hidden among those files. Silas looked at her for a long moment, the gray folder heavy in his hands, before he nodded and told Thomas to arrange for a private vehicle to take them to the village first thing in the morning. Lily walked back to her small room in the servant wing, her mind spinning with the realization that she was going to return to her hometown with the king himself. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, looking at her worn leather shoes and wondering what Eleanor would say if she discovered her stepdaughter was helping Silas with estate business. She knew the risks were high. If Eleanor found out, her life at home would become even more difficult, and the small amount of freedom she had found at Stonecrest would disappear completely. Yet, when she thought of the children in Silver Falls who needed the school to stay open through the freezing winter, she knew she could not remain silent or hidden any longer. She folded her hands in lap, her thumbs still feeling warm from the healing salve Silas had applied, and resolved to find the hidden papers no matter what it cost her. Later that night the house became quiet, as the guests retired to their luxurious rooms, and the grand chandeliers were turned off one by one. Lily lay awake under her thin blanket, listening to the wind howl through the pine trees outside her window and the distant sound of the grandfather clock striking midnight in the main hall. She felt a strange sense of change in the air, as if the old stone walls of Stonecrest were shifting around her, opening up paths she had never expected to walk. For 3 years she had been a shadow, a girl who existed only to serve others and keep her head down to avoid the sharp words of her stepfamily. But as she closed her eyes, she remembered the steady weight of Silas's gray eyes looking at her in the library, and she realized that some shadows were meant to come into the light. Early the next morning, at 6 o'clock, Lily met Silas and Thomas by the side entrance of the estate, where a plain black vehicle was waiting for them. The morning air was freezing, and her breath formed small white clouds in front of her face as she stepped onto the gravel driveway. Silas was already waiting, dressed in a long black wool coat that made his white hair stand out against the dark sky. He opened the door for her himself, a small gesture that made Thomas blink in surprise, but say nothing as he climbed into the driver's seat. Lily sat in the back next to the king, feeling the smooth leather of the seats and the gentle warmth of the car's heater as they started down the mountain. The drive was quiet at first, the only sound being the tires crunching over the fresh snow that had fallen during the night. As the vehicle cleared the estate gates, Silas turned to Lily and asked her to tell him more about her father's work in the village. Lily cleared her throat and explained that her father had been the only doctor for 40 miles, often traveling through the deep snow to reach families who lived in the remote parts of the valley. She told him how her father never asked for money from those who could not pay, often accepting a basket of apples or a cord of wood instead of dollars. Silas listened intently, his pale face resting against his hand as he looked out the window at the passing trees. He admitted that he had lived on the hill for so long that he had forgotten how difficult life could be for the people who did not have the resources of the big house. He told her that his role as king was not just about collecting taxes or maintaining the grand statues in his courtyard. It was about protecting the people who relied on him. He said that when the school endowment was established 3 years ago, he believed he had secured the future of the town's children for at least 10 years. He confessed that the report of the deficit had troubled him deeply because he hated the thought of his people suffering while he sat in a warm house. Lily looked at his profile, noticing the tightness in his jaw and the genuine concern in his eyes, and realized that the stories the villagers told about him were wrong. He was not a cold monster. He was a man who had been isolated from the world by his own responsibilities. They arrived at the storage facility on the edge of Silver Falls just as the sun was beginning to rise over the hills, casting a pale pink light across the metal buildings. Thomas parked the car near the office, and Lily led them to the small unit that Eleanor had rented after her father's funeral. Thomas used a set of keys he had taken from the house to open the heavy padlock, the metal door groaning as he pushed it upward to reveal the crowded space inside. The unit was packed with old furniture, dusty boxes, and crates of old medical equipment that had belonged to her father's clinic. Lily stepped into the cold room, her eyes watering slightly from the dust, as she began to read the handwritten labels on the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. Silas did not stand outside. He walked into the dusty unit behind her, his long coat brushing against the old chairs as he asked which boxes she wanted to check first. Lily pointed to a stack of blue crates in the corner, explaining that her father always kept his financial records in matching files to keep them separate from his medical notes. Silas reached for the top crate, his pale hands moving easily despite the weight of the box, and set it down on an old wooden table in the center of the space. Lily opened the lid, her fingers tracing the edges of the old paper folders until she found the one marked with the school board emblem. She pulled it out, her heart beating fast as she blew a thin layer of dust off the cover and opened it. Inside were dozens of official transfer slips, bank statements, and letters from the town council dating back to the year her father died. Lily spread the papers out on the table, pointing to a column of figures from 3 years ago that showed the exact amount of money Silas had sent from the estate. Silas leaned over her shoulder, his cool breath brushing her cheek as his eyes scanned the numbers with the same speed he had used in the library. His fingers stopped on a series of monthly withdrawals that did not match the school's official bank statements from the previous evening. He noted that the money had been sent to a private account under the name of Miller, the local administrator who handled the town's paperwork. Silas's face went entirely still, his gray eyes darkening until they looked like a storm sky as he realized where the missing school funds had gone. He told Thomas to take a photograph of every slip in the folder and to contact the state authorities to freeze Miller's accounts before the sun was fully up. He turned to Lily, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as he told her that her memory had saved the village from losing its school before the winter arrived. Lily felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that her father's careful habits had finally served the town he loved so much, even after he was gone. Silas closed the folder, his voice low as he promised her that the people who took the money would pay every dollar back to the children. The drive back to Stonecrest was faster, the tension from the morning replaced by a quiet determination as Thomas made phone calls from the front seat. Lily watched the snow-covered mountains appear in the distance, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment that she had never known while working in Eleanor's kitchen. Silas beside her, his posture relaxed as he told her that the final ball would take place the following evening, and he expected her to be there as his guest. Lily looked down at her old coat, reminding him that she did not have a gown for a royal event, and that Eleanor would never allow her to enter the ballroom. Silas looked at her with a calm smile, his white hair catching the bright morning light, and told her that he would handle Eleanor when the time came. The day of the final ball arrived with a storm of activity that kept the entire estate moving from the early hours of the morning until sunset. Lily spent 12 hours in the sewing room and the laundry, pressing the heavy fabric of Maya's crimson gown and Chloe's pink pearl dress until her arms ached from the weight of the iron. Her half-sisters were more demanding than usual, their voices rising in sharp arguments over hairpins and shoes. As the hours ticked closer to the evening event, Eleanor stood by the door, watching Lily work with a critical eye, repeating that this night would decide the future of their family and that no mistakes would be tolerated. Lily said nothing, keeping her head down as she finished the last hem, her mind focused on the promise Silas had made her in the car. When the clock struck 7 o'clock, the family left their suite to join the other guests in the grand hall, leaving Lily alone in the quiet rooms. She walked back to her small quarters in the servant wing, her body tired from the long day. but her spirit feeling lighter than it had in years. She opened the small wooden box under her bed and pulled out the pale ivory silk dress that had belonged to her mother before the illness took her. The fabric was thin but soft, and she had spent the last 3 nights using her tiny candle to repair the delicate lace along the collar and sleeves. She slipped the dress on, the silk fitting her perfectly as if it had been made for her, and fastened her father's silver clip into her dark hair. She did not use the main staircase. She walked down the back service steps and entered the ballroom through the side archway, staying close to the shadow of the large marble pillars. The room was beautiful, filled with the light of 100 candles, and the sound of a string orchestra playing a slow, elegant waltz. 20 women in bright dresses of green, blue, and gold moved across the polished floor, their laughter filling the air as they tried to catch the king's eye. Silas stood near the center of the room, his black tuxedo making his white hair and pale skin look like marble under the bright chandeliers. He danced with several guests, his movements polite and correct, but his eyes never stopped moving across the room, as if he were looking for someone. Lily watched him from her corner, her hand resting against the cool stone of the pillar as she admired the grace with which he moved through the crowd. Suddenly she felt a sharp grip on her arm, and she turned to see Eleanor standing beside her, her face twisted in a look of sudden rage. Eleanor pulled her behind the pillar, out of sight of the main dance floor, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the music. She demanded to know what Lily was doing in the ballroom, her eyes fixing on the ivory silk dress with a look of deep disgust. Maya and Chloe joined them a moment later, their smiles disappearing as they saw their stepsister standing in the room they thought belonged only to them. Eleanor accused Lily of stealing the dress from the storage boxes and trying to ruin Maya's chances with the king by showing up in rags. Lily pulled her arm away, her voice quiet but steady, as she told her stepmother that the dress belonged to her mother and that she had every right to be there. Eleanor refused to listen, her face turning red as she reached out with her sharp nails and grabbed the delicate lace at Lily's shoulder. She pulled with all her strength, the sound of the ripping silk loud in the small space behind the pillar as the fabric tore from the collar down to the waist. Lily gasped, her hands flying to her chest to hold the ruined dress together as she felt the cold air hit her skin. Chloe let out a low laugh, whispering that Lily looked like a beggar who had tried to play at being a lady and had failed completely. Maya turned her back, saying that they should leave her there so everyone could see what happens to servants who do not know their place in the world. Lily felt the hot sting of tears behind her eyes, the familiar feeling of helplessness threatening to overwhelm her as she stood in the shadows. But before Eleanor could speak another word, the music stopped completely, and the entire ballroom went so quiet that you could hear the wind brushing against the high glass windows. Silas was standing at the edge of the pillar, his face pale and rigid with an anger that seemed to drop the temperature of the entire room. He did not look at Eleanor. He walked past her as if she were made of glass, his focus entirely on Lily's shaking form. He reached up and unclasped his long black velvet cloak, the heavy fabric lined with charcoal silk and embroidered with the thorn crown crest of his family. He placed it gently around Lily's shoulders, his cool fingers steady as he fastened the silver clasp at her throat with 2 precise movements. The weight of the velvet settled over her like a wall, instantly hiding the torn dress and warming her cold skin as he looked down at her. He asked her quietly if she was hurt, his gray eyes soft as he waited for her response, ignoring the 90 people who were watching them from the dance floor. Lily shook her head, her voice a small whisper as she told him she was okay, her hands still gripping the inside of his heavy cloak. Silas held her gaze for 1 more second, his expression softening before he turned around to face Eleanor and her daughters. The silence in the room was absolute, as the guests pressed forward to see what the king would do next. Silas did not raise his voice. He spoke with a cold precision that carried to every corner of the grand hall, telling the assembly that a family that treated its own blood with such cruelty had no right to remain under his roof. He signaled to Thomas, who stepped out of the shadows with a legal folder in his hand, ready to change everything. Thomas stepped into the center of the circle, opening the folder and reading from the official documents that had been verified by the state authorities that morning. His voice was calm and clear as he revealed to the entire ballroom that Eleanor had been systematic in her deception, stealing Lily's inheritance and the town school funds for 3 years. The guests let out a collective gasp, their eyes turning from Lily to Eleanor with expressions of deep disgust and disapproval. Maya and Chloe looked at the floor, their faces turning bright red as they realized their dream of wealth and status had disappeared in a single minute. Silas ordered the security guards to escort the 3 women out of the estate immediately, stating that their presence was an insult to his house. Eleanor tried to raise her voice, to offer an excuse, her hand shaking as she reached for her daughter's arms, but the look in Silas's gray eyes silenced her before she could speak. They were led away through the main doors, their expensive velvet dresses dragging on the stone floor as they left Stonecrest forever, to face the legal consequences of their actions in the town below. Lily stood beside the king, the heavy black velvet cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, her heart slowing down as the fear finally left her body. Silas turned back to the remaining guests, his posture straight, and his voice steady as he announced that the selection was officially over because he had found what he was looking for. He looked down at Lily, his gray eyes full of a quiet warmth that she had never seen before, and he spoke so the whole room could hear his words. He stated that he had met many women who were trained to wear crowns, but Lily was the only one who understood the value of quiet kindness and honesty. He asked her openly, in front of all the witnesses, if she would allow him to court her with honorable intentions and stay at Stonecrest as his partner. Lily looked into his face, seeing the man behind the title, and she said yes, her voice small but clear in the silent hall. A quiet murmur of approval moved through the crowd, and she saw Sarah and Peter smiling from the kitchen doorway. 1 year later, the winter snow was falling once again over the town of Silver Falls, but the house on the hill did not feel cold anymore. Lily sat by the large window of the library, a thick ledger open on the desk in front of her as she finished the monthly accounts for the estate. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth and casting a golden light over the walnut that were now filled with new books from the city. She had spent the last 12 months working with Thomas to reorganize the estate finances, ensuring that every dollar went to the maintenance of the lands and the welfare of the people who lived in the valley. Silas walked into the room, his long coat damp from the snow, as he returned from his weekly visit to the village school. He walked to the desk and stood behind her chair, placing his cool hands on her shoulders and leaning down to look at the numbers she had been writing. He told her that the headmistress had sent her thanks for the new heating system, which had been installed just before the deep freeze arrived that morning. Lily turned her head to smile at him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence, her mind drifting back to the days when she had been a shadow in her father's kitchen. She thought about Eleanor and her daughters, who had been forced to sell the big house to pay back the funds they had taken from the school, and Lily's private account. Lily had not sought revenge. She had allowed the law to handle the matter fairly, choosing to focus her energy on building a life of purpose here at Stonecrest. She had established a reading room for the household staff and worked with local lawyers to create better protections for young women who lost their parents. She had learned that the scars of her past did not define her. They were simply the marks of a journey that had brought her to a place of true safety. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 6 o'clock, reminding them that dinner would be served soon in the small dining room downstairs. Silas held out his hand, his gray eyes reflecting the light of the fire, as he asked if she was ready to leave the books for the evening. Lily stood up and took his hand, her fingers fitting perfectly between his as they walked toward the door together. She looked back at the library one last time, seeing the pen resting on the clean paper and the books lined up neatly on the high shelves. She knew that her life would always have its challenges, but as they walked into the warm hall, she felt a quiet certainty that she was no longer a shadow in someone else's story. Standing by the window as the daylight fades into the long winter night, I realize that the true measure of a life is not found in the grand rooms we occupy or the fine clothes we are given to wear. For a long time, I believed that my existence was defined by the silence of the kitchen, the weight of tasks that were never mine to choose. I thought that survival meant staying small, keeping my eyes on the floor, and waiting for the storm to pass without leaving a mark on the people around me. But the stone walls of this house have taught me something different over the past year. Something that my father tried to tell me before the quiet took him completely. Healing does not happen because the world suddenly becomes kind. It happens when we choose to hold on to our own truth, when the darkness is loudest. It is found in the small decisions to help someone who has fallen, to correct a mistake that no one else noticed, and to wear an old silk dress with our chin held high even when hands are reaching out to tear it away. The king's cloak was a shield, but the strength to stand in the center of the room was already inside me, waiting for the moment I stopped hiding from my own name. As the snow covers the valley below, I know that belonging is not a place you are given by others. It is a space you make for yourself when you decide that you are finally worth seeing.